Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Hi, gorgeous. Hello, people. Can you all hear me well? Okay, great. So, good afternoon. It's so nice to be here. I'd like to thank Disal for inviting me and Troika to be here in this afternoon. And thank everybody that is here to spend a little bit of your afternoon with me talking about assessment today. I do have to apologize. There's kind of some construction work going on here in my building that started today. So if you hear some terrible noise, please bear with me. I'm really sorry. So today we're here to talk about assessment. But just before we start, I just would like to say a few things about myself. Yes, it means home office anyway, dear. You're totally right. So my name is Akemi. I'm Akemi Iwasa. I'm from Rio de Janeiro, but I'm currently São Paulo based. I am an academic consultant at Troika. So I mainly work with designing content, educational content and training and professional development sessions. And here in São Paulo, it's a very cold afternoon, indeed, just like all afternoons in São Paulo. Such a cold place. I miss Rio so much. And I'd like to know where you're based, where you talking here from. Somebody from Mossoró, Rio Grande do Norte, Rio. Rio is the best. I miss Rio. Hello, Mexico! Yay! Sorocaba. In Maceió is a bit hot. I wish São Paulo was a bit hot, but it's just like always cold. That's life here. And I'd also like to know a little bit about you. I can't see your faces, but we're gonna be here for this hour talking together. So could you tell me something about you? I just wrote these 3 prompts, so you can choose one of these prompts and type something in the chat. So something you know, something you would like to know, and something you want me to know. It doesn't have to be connected with assessment, okay? We'll have like 55 minutes to talk about it. So can you tell me something about you? For example, you could tell me that you've been vaccinated. That's the best thing I like to hear about people. But, tell me anything. Callison knows how to cook. That's something I don't. I wish I knew because, iFood has all my money. André is saying that Troika rocks. Definitely. Love Troika. Somebody would like to know how to speak Italian. Yeah, I don't, but yeah, that would be nice. Hello, Livia. So nice to hear from you here. Somebody knows how to speak German. Okay. English teachers can take vaccine. Well, in some places, yes, that's true. Somebody was vaccinated 15 days ago. That's the best news. That's the only thing we've been talking about. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for bringing that up. Right. Somebody here knows how to take care of their family in general. We are tired of this pandemic, indeed. So nice to read, hear some comments from you because, we don't know, I don't know most of you, but we have so much in common when I get to read what you're saying. So, another Akemi here is doing her best to learn Japanese, or doing their best. Japanese is hard. I used to speak Japanese pretty well, but not anymore. Okay, somebody here, Karina said that assessment can be a very efficient way of teaching. Now I'd like to know how. Yes, don't we all? So I guess we can talk then more about assessment then. It's really nice to know some things about you. And throughout the session, I really hope you use the chat box to interact with me and with everybody from the session. I'll try to keep an eye here and read everything. And I'll try to keep an eye here and read everything. I'm sorry if I missed any comments, but I'm keeping an eye here. So let's talk about assessment then. The first thing I think we should start is to understand a little bit your ideas and beliefs when it comes to assessment, okay? So I wrote 3 questions here that I'd like you to think a little bit on how to answer them. You don't need to answer them right now, okay? Just think. So first question is, in your opinion, of course, how important assessment is to the teaching learning process? How often you get to study assessment, so read about it, take a course about it, or a webinar about it. And finally, how happy you are with the way you assess students. So I want you to think a little bit about these 3 questions, okay? And I'll give you time to answer each of them. Hello, Carol from here. So the first question was, how important is assessment to the teaching learning process? I asked this question in my Insta stories 2 days ago, and I gave people these 4 options for them to check. So if they think assessment is essential, is very important, is important but not essential, or not very important. And I'll show you their answers, but I'd like you to hear from you. Yes, that is the noise. I don't know. Maybe. Sorry. So can you try to answer that? Maybe you can type A, B, C, or D. In your opinion, what is the role of assessment? So some A's, B's. I got a C. I guess you have mostly A's. I mean, you are in a session about assessment, so you must think this is essential. So A's, B's, mostly 1 or 2 C's, but nobody here thinks it's not very important. But then let me show you the answers I got from my Insta stories. It was like about 85 people that answered. So I think it's a good number. This is the percentage that I got. So 24% think it's essential and 19% very important, just like most of you here. 46%, the majority of people that answered, said it is important but not essential. And 11% said that it's not very important. So I think we have like the biggest number here is letter C. So most of the teachers that replied to this quiz said it is important but not essential. But I guess we can see that there is not a consensus here on the role of assessment, right? Because 1/10 of the people that replied said they don't think it's important. And so it's something to think about here. What exactly people think assessment is, because I think it's a huge number, 46% of these teachers that believe it is important but not essential. So it is okay to have a teaching learning process without assessment. It is a good number. So again, I guess food for thought here, what people think assessment is, right? So a second question then, it is how often you get to study assessment. So I asked this question also, and it was in the Insta story, so people could like drag to say from like never to always. So maybe you could answer that in the chat box using adverbs of frequency. So how often you get to study assessment? Tell me. Right, so we get like always, from time to time, rarely, quite often, not as much as one should, often, usually. Okay, so this was the answers that I got. For this one, I actually did not get a screenshot of all the answers because I had like to blur people's faces and names, but I get the average to show to you. So this was the average that we got, like pretty much the average. So would say the teachers that replied to my quiz get to study assessment like sometimes. But this is not really a valid result here, because if we look at some of the answers, this is just the first screenshot. If you look at some of the answers, we get people that said never and people that said always. So it varies a lot here, the replies that I got. and I used the chorinho emoji because I'm a millennial. Sorry, chorinho is the only possible emoji. So see, if we get like this result, okay, so teachers sometimes study assessment. This wouldn't be like a very good answer because, as I said, I got completely different answers here from people. And never was a pretty common answer. And last question then, I asked the teachers how happy they were with the way they assess students. And they had like only two possibilities to say like the happy face or the not so happy face. So question to you, how happy you are with the way you assess students? Then you can use the chat box the way you want. That's improvement. So, not happy at all. Used to be happy, I guess that would be my answer. Love the sad emojis. Not that happy. Okay, somebody's happy, so. Well, these were the answers. 57% said they were not so happy. That's like the face. 43% are happy with the way they assess students. So the majority of teachers are not so happy. And just like I guess what I see here in the chat box, I guess we are not so happy with the way we assess students, or at least we think there is room for improvement, right? So this is nice for us to know here, to be on the same page and you know where we stand in terms of our ideas and beliefs in terms of assessment. And then also, still here to make sure we are on the same page, there's a couple of definitions and concepts that I'd like to go over here just to make sure when we talk about assessment, again, we're talking about the same thing, right? And the first one is a definition of assessment. So again, going back to that question that I asked teachers there, let me see if I can come back here. How important assessment is. When I think of this 46% of teachers that said it is important but not essential, I kept wondering what assessment is for these teachers, right? So if we had to define assessment, what that is, can you try like some keywords or even a definition if you want to go here in the chat box? What is assessment? Somebody said evaluation. It's a kind of evaluation. Assessment is connected to feedback. Feedback and checking progress. Knowing yourself. That's really hard, but yes, you're right. Continuous process regarding the student's development. So development is a key word here, continuous. A way to check how students have improved. Okay, so let me show you a definition here. It's from Vilas Boas and Nobre. Assessment refers to the wide variety of tools that educators use to evaluate, measure, and document the academic readiness, the learning progress, the skill acquisition, or educational needs of the students. So some of you used these words here, right? Checking progress, evaluating, and assessment is all that. So when we think of this, we have to keep in mind that we're talking about a variety of tools. And sometimes I wonder if when we think of assessment, we're only thinking of tests. Yeah, these happens a little bit, and we're going to talk about tests in a while. So just to make sure then, assessment is about a wide variety of tools. So there are many ways that we can evaluate, measure, and document this progress. So a test is a way, a composition that we ask students to do, questions that we ask in the classroom. All of this are different tools that we can use to assess, to check progress, right? And then back to the idea of this being essential or not, I really think that it's hard to imagine this learning process, right? The teaching learning process taking place without any kind of assessment. It can be possible without any kind of tests. And that's why I think sometimes we still mistake assessment, tests. We still think they are synonyms when they are not, right? When we talk about tests, just to make sure we are on the same page, testing is this process, right? All the kinds of procedures applied at specific points in a curriculum or during a course. So like a test at the end of the semester, a test at the end of the unit. And test is part of assessment, of course. It's a way, but it's not the only kind of assessment that we at least should have in a course, right? Something that I think is interesting in this definition from Brown is that they say that at the moment of testing, learners are expected to offer peak performance, especially because they know that their responses are being measured and evaluated. And this might be one of the reasons why some people get so anxious when they have to take tests, because they know that peak performance is expected of them. But not necessarily we should expect peak performance throughout the whole course. And again, throughout the whole course, we can keep assessing the students, right? Most of them do. Most students, most people get nervous, right, during tests. That's true, and that's a reality. And that's why I liked this idea of understanding that they get nervous because they know we expect the best performance they can, their peak performance, and it's a lot of responsibility and a lot of expectations, right? So is it clear for us that when we're talking about assessment, we are not only talking about testing? This is part of assessment, but that's not the only way. Is that okay? Right? Okay. And I know that in theory, this is quite clear for many of us. This distinction may be quite clear, but in practical terms, not so much. That's why it's always good to reinforce this idea. Also, still talking about definitions and concepts, this webinar, I think we don't have time here to focus on tests and tasks, assessment tasks in general, design. But it's always important that we keep in mind that when people design assessment tasks, they have some key concepts in mind. So I'd just like to go over these concepts. If this is the first time you are getting to know this concepts, I really recommend you like screenshot this and then take a look at the reference that I'm going to show at the end of the session so you can read more deeply about it, because we're not going to focus on the development of all these concepts. I'm just going to go over them quite quickly. But I mean, you can also DM me and I can send you more reference. But then just for us to keep in mind here, our focus in this webinar is to talk about the purpose of assessment. But I think it's important to understand how assessment tasks should be created. So these concepts are pretty useful. Of course, there are many things we can take into consideration when design an assessment task. But most authors agree on these 5 concepts here. That's why I got this 5. It's reliability, validity, authenticity, practicality, and washback. So just taking a quick look at them. Reliability, we're talking about the act of being reliable, of a task being consistent. You can count on this. Usually, a reliable task generates similar results, even when the students are taking on different occasions, right? So if a student's taking the test this week and then 2 weeks from now is like taking this test again or doing this task again, usually you're going to have similar results, or roughly similar results. So this has to do with reliability. Of course, there are a lot of factors that might affect performance, but here we're talking about the effects that are controlled by the task, right? Another important concept is to think of validity, right? That is, if this task checks what is supposed to check, what is supposed to be assessed, right? If the skills needed are related to the actual content, right? So I can give you an example that happened with me. I was taking a course, and then at the end of the course, there was a task we had to do. It was a project, and we're going to be assessed about the content of the course by this project. And for this project, we needed the skills that were not mentioned throughout the whole course. So we either knew or didn't know how to do it. So this is a situation that maybe this assessment task was not designed the best way because it's not valid, right? An interesting thing for us to consider when we think about a task being valid or not, and is this question that Vilas Boas and Nobre brings, that in the past, we used to think, is this test valid or not? So we would think of validity in terms of the assignment task or the test. But we might look at validity in a different way. And it is thinking if there is a particular use of this test score valid for your context. So more than thinking if this object is valid or not, is what you can do with the results, what you can do with the test scores. How can you apply this score to your course and to the development of your learners? These would say if that tool was valid or not. Okay? Third concept is authenticity, and it has to do with the fact that this task mirrors the situations which encourage students to use the language in an authentic way. So pretty common to have, I think it's more common to see this in tests, to see like those questions that students have to unscramble the letters to form words, you know? So again, how authentic is that? I mean, which situations students would really have to unscramble letters to form words during communication? So it has to be with authenticity. Practicality is the act of being practical. So is this task practical for the teachers? So there's like appropriate time for teachers to assign, there's appropriate time for students to do, for teachers to get it back, to give feedback. So is it practical or not? Hi Ingrid, good afternoon. And finally, the fifth concept is washback, which is the effect of testing on teaching and learning. Very common, I guess the best example to talk about washback is like when you have standardized examinations, like a name, and then you have a course or classes focusing a bit on that, or when you have prep classes. So you're taking your C2 proficiency exam, and then you get prep classes to prepare you for this exam. So that's where washback effect should be high. Then again, I'm just going through these 5 concepts here. Sorry if it was too quick, but the idea was just like to jog your memory a little bit if you've heard of them before. So just for us to keep these in mind. And again, if this is the first time you get in contact with these words, check the references so you can study a bit more assessment design, or DM me. I don't know about you, but in my experience, there are many things about assessment that I got to study the first time when I was already creating tasks, when I was already doing that. I remember the first test that I designed was when I was an undergraduate student, and I had no knowledge of all of that. We study very little assessment in graduation courses, even in other training courses. So get familiar with these concepts because it's really helpful. Yes, Carol, claque. So then, as I said, the purpose here of our conversation today is a bit more on the purpose of assessment than on creating assessment. And to talk about the purpose, I guess we need to understand that we have a traditional view of assessment. There's this common paradigm. And I think it's the time for us to shift this a little bit. And for that, I'd like to show this 2 sets of beliefs in terms of assessment. So the first one is what we call assessment of learning, right? And what is assessment of learning then? Is the idea that, it usually occurs at a specific point or a specific milestone. So assessment of learning is like when at the end of a course you take a test, or at the end of a unit, at the end of a lesson, you do an exercise to check how much you've learned about that unit. So a specific point. or a relevant milestone for that process. And it provides evidence of learning to people. So I guess the key concept of assessment of learning is providing evidence of learning. So when I say here, provide evidence of learning to people, it means to students. So when you do a task or you take a test and then you got like a 9 out of 10, we can discuss what exactly it means, but for a student it means something. Okay, this task was worth 10 points and I got a 9, so it is evidence of learning. Again, we can discuss what exactly a 9 means or a concept means, but I guess there's a common sense in society that if you got 9 out of 10, it is a good result. So it tells something to students. It tells something to families. Probably if you have experience here teaching kids or teenagers, we have to provide evidence of learning to the families. And lots of times they ask about grades. They want to know the grades, the score, because this makes them, I don't know, this makes them at peace with that. Oh, okay, my kid got an A, fantastic. So it is evidence of learning somehow. To the school, so if you get like half of students in a course failing a course, for example, or getting like a low score, it provides some evidence of what's taking place at that course. So for the school, this is also relevant. For employers, more than once, I had to provide a copy of my C2 Cambridge C2 proficiency exam to employers. So to say that, I knew how to speak English. So it was an evidence of learning for my employers and also for the community, right? Again, getting the example from Cambridge exams, I think is pretty common. I see that a lot in my social media when people get their proficiency exams, their CELTA, their Delta, they take pictures and publish that on their accounts, super proud of that. So for them, it is important evidence of learning, right? And then here there is a list of some concepts that we usually associate with assessment of learning, right? This is from Brown. So usually assessment of learning is about one-shot standardized exams. So I gave you a couple of examples of standardized exams. Usually they're connected to timed multiple choice format in the sense that usually when we talk about assessment of learning, there is not much room for subjective answers. Usually we have decontextualized items in the tasks. Feedback is related to the score you get. So if you get a 9, this is the feedback. It means very good. If you get an A in a proficiency exam, it means you're fantastic. You are a C2, you are a C1. So you get a score, and this is associated with feedback. This is the feedback you usually get. This is the only feedback you usually get. So assessment of learning usually focuses on the right answer, right? So you want to have clear evidence that that student, that person knows that item. So usually one possible answer. It is what we call summative assessment. So summative assessment and assessment of learning might be pretty much the same. It is usually oriented to products. So there's a test, a composition you're going to write, a project you're going to develop. There is a clear product. And fosters extrinsic motivation, right? So for example, when I took my proficiency exam, my proficiency test, it is because I knew employers wanted that, and the society as a whole expected me to have this kind of certificate. So it was not I wanted to get that. I needed to get that because it is what was expected, right? So these are some of the key concepts when we talk about assessment of learning, right? Can you identify that in your practice, in your classroom, in your lessons? Can you give me examples of instances of assessment of learning that takes place in your lessons and in your courses? or maybe a test that you've taken, as I talked about Cambridge C2. Final exams. Most, I don't know about you, but most language courses back in here, they usually have like midterm and final exams. It was pretty much common in, I guess, almost all language courses. The CAE exams, yeah, all these Cambridge exams, right? You know, like first, advanced proficiency, they changed their names, right? Yeah. Yes, Marinese proficiency exams in general, IELTS, yeah. Right, placement tests, somebody mentioned here. Yes, did you take this specific moment to assess what you already know about that topic? Okay, so we are pretty much familiar with assessment of learning because I think it happens a lot in our practice and it happens a lot on the way we were assessed and we are assessed, right? So another way to look at assessment, and that's this shift that I guess we noticed that in the past few years, a shift towards assessment for learning instead of assessment of learning. And what's the idea of assessment for learning? It takes place throughout the whole process. So if we're talking about like a course, it takes place throughout the whole course, right? And gives teachers and students the necessary information to guide their decisions as the course unfolds. So ideally, assessment for learning helps us, teachers, and also students to make decisions throughout this whole process to change the course of situation if we need to, while we're still in the same process, while we're still in the same course, right? Somebody mentioned here in the chat formative assessment. And you're totally right, right? As assessment of learning, we're talking about a more summative process. Here we're talking about a formative process. So some characteristics of assessment for learning then. So here we have continuous long-term assessment. So if your course is like a semester long, it's a semester long of assessment, right? Or if it's a week long, it's a week long of assessment. Usually we're looking at a more free response format. So there's more room for creativity here, not only like objective questions. Contextualized tasks, individualized feedback and washback. And I think this is really interesting because remember when we're talking about assessment of learning, we're saying that you got the score. So usually the feedback you get is the score. And here it's not about a score, but understanding what exactly you really need to know to develop. You need to know as a student to develop what exactly an A. An A doesn't mean much, or it might mean something different to me than it means to Sonia here in the class. So it is understanding that people need a more customized experience with feedback, more individualized feedback. So it is about having open-ended and room for creative answers, formative assessment. Here we're talking about a process that is oriented to the whole process of thing. So the whole process of learning is important, not only a moment at the end, and the moment that is high on anxiety because you're expected to perform, remember, peak level. And it fosters intrinsic motivation because here we're talking about you developing in what matters to you and the way you can get there, right? So if we look at the two, just having like the two here side by side. So what we're talking about assessment of learning and then assessment for learning. Of course, when we think of assessment of learning, we think of a more traditional way, to approach assessment. As I said, I think this is the way that lots of us, or maybe most of us here, were assessed during school and are still assessed when we take courses outside of this, education area. Because it's still the same way. You still have like very specific tests, standardized tests. You got like results. There are numbers or concepts. So this is a more traditional way. And then assessment for learning will be an alternative way to look at assessment and understand this as rather, it's not only very important, but essential to everything that you're doing in the teaching learning process, because there is no learning without all this taking place. Right. And as I said, I've noticed in the last years a shift here. So I guess some of us, or most of us, are more familiar with procedures related to assessment for learning. And we might have that also in our classes or, in our lessons. So again, could you give me an example of assessment for learning that you have in your lessons or classes, or something that you had the experience, to lead this as a student? Sonia, you talked about feedback experiment, definitely, because all this, everything that we're talking about when we look at assessment for learning, we're talking about this constant feedback process. The feedback has to be effective, right? Project presentations, I guess project work is a bit, it depends a little bit, right? Because depending on the teacher and the way you are assessing your students, it might be just assessment of learning, or it might suit assessment for learning. But definitely, people that mention projects, I think they're great room for us to be able to give this, continuous feedback, and to give room for students to change the course of situations throughout the whole process, definitely. Portfolios, yes. Sharing learning expectations. Assessment based on competences and how people are developing that throughout a course, definitely. Okay, so I have lots of examples. I don't know if it's possible to see a moment that we won't be dealing with assessment of learning. Maybe we will get to this moment, but looking at society the way it is now, I think it's pretty hard to be completely rid of that. But I guess if we can get a mix of both of them, understanding the purpose of each of these tasks that we are assigning, I guess we can get a good balance there. And when we think of our classes now, assessment in 2021, when we think of our classes now, the situation that we have, most of us here are dealing with online classes, online lessons, and I think they help us a lot in something. This is not the construction work, this was my cat. And it helps us a lot with something that teachers find really hard in terms of assessment for learning, which is this possibility of gathering evidence throughout the whole course, right? Sometimes it is really hard, it is really challenging and time-consuming to be able to get this evidence, to record that throughout the whole course. But with online learning, we have some tools that might help us. And I want to show a quick video to you with here. This video is not about assessment at all. It is about this strategy that this teacher has developed. And I want you to pay attention to it. It's like 3-4 minutes. And then in the chat box, we can connect this to assessment of learning and for learning. Just a second. Yeah. I'm sorry. I think I didn't get sound. Okay. So, I'm sorry. Let's start again.
All right, there we go. Everybody's popping in. Ready to do this? Okay, so the multiple transitions that have taken place this year have impacted all of my students, we started off the year virtual as one giant class. And then when we came back hybrid, they were split apart.
It has been a lot harder to connect with my teacher and other students. I'm not seeing most of them in person anymore.
I really needed something to connect students who are completely virtual and the kids who are here in person, and to create more normalcy throughout this entire pandemic. Kids really need their own space that is authentically theirs. I am represented in my classroom, no matter where the classroom is. And that's the reasons digital desks came into being. There you go, guys. The link is in the chat. I'm going to present now, and then we'll go over the warm-up. I wanted something simple, and so I created a Google Slides deck where each student has their own individual desk, and the teacher has a board. The students go in to the desk, they personalize them. You make a copy of it every day before they start writing on it. All right, so the warm-up for today, I want you to go to your desk, pick a favorite childhood memory, and use at least one example of figurative language in your warm-up.
It's really helped us connect because it's like we're all in the same classroom, even though we're not. We can see everybody working live right there. You just click on someone's desk and you can see them typing.
Google Slides has this great feature where you can look at all your slides at once. And so I zoom out to this aerial view of my classroom, and all the kids are at their own desk doing whatever it is they're doing, but I can see all of them working at once. Oh, wow. First travel soccer team, Lily. Ooh, Xavier. That is an awesome simile that you threw in there. Yeah, if you want to see some awesome writing, you check out Xavier's desk. And as I see them work, I can see when problems arise, the students have this color-coded system. Green means I'm good. Red means I need 911 help. Pop into my slide right now. So it's kind of like a classroom where you see a kid raise their hand. Now, go to someone else's desk to leave them feedback. Using the comment tool, you're going to highlight something.
After the warm-up, we went to other students' desks and we left a glow and a grow.
Love the feedback you're giving each other. You guys are doing awesome. Now, here's what I want you to do. We're going to get with partners. If you go up and you look at the board, Nathan and Delilah are going to be partners at Nathan's desk. The biggest surprise from utilizing digital desks is students are becoming more confident in their writing. At first, they were a little bit scared because they knew everyone else can see what I'm doing. But because of that, it makes them put their best selves forward. Getting some good lines, some good hyperboles. Because kids are expressing themselves, they have a space that's theirs. My students are thriving and engaging with each other. And so now you'll see kids going to other kids' desks and just saying, hey, great job on this, or leaving another kid a note. I want you to read the poem. The one you like the best, put the name of the person who you think should win in the chat, and then you can peace out, Cub Scouts. And I love you guys. It's kept my students together. They'll have a place that's theirs no matter where we are. Bye, guys. Have a great weekend.
And I'm back here. Just a second, everybody. Okay, back here. Can you hear me again? Yes, okay. So I loved this tool, right? This digital desk tool. And as I said, initially here, the focus of this video is not assessment, right? So help me out here in the chat box. The idea here is that this teacher was working with like concurrent teaching, right? She had some students in class, some students online, and she wanted to have this place where they would all be together, right? And that's how she created this digital desks thing. I see that some of you liked the idea. If you go to Edutopia site, you can have the template for this desk if you want to copy the template for you, but it's something quite simple to create, you know. And then I want to hear from you a little bit here in the chat box. How can we use these digital desks for to help us gather evidence in terms of assessment, right? I mean, she talked in the video about how great it is to have this place where like she can see the whole class together and they can see like they're all there as a classroom. She can easily go to each desk and see what each person is doing. Somebody said here they use the same idea, but with Jamboard. Yes. But then can you tell me here, how can we use this in terms of assessment? How can we gather evidence to help us with assessment for learning? It's Edutopia. You just go like, I knew here. Let me see if I can find, oh, just a second. This is the link if you want to get the template, right? Okay, so let me read what you're saying. Okay, so it's a kind of free response format. Yes, in the tasks that she devised here, they have lots of room to be creative and still could have clear evidence of their development. Franciane is saying that we could use to assess writing. And the students could assess other students' writing. So there is clear room here for like peer assessment, right? Like this peer work. Did you get the technique that she mentioned that they do? It's like the glow and grow techniques. Did you get that? So Carol was talking about students giving feedback to each other. Yeah, so they would highlight something that they found really interesting, and there will be the glow moment, and something that they could see here that there's room for improvement, and that's the grow thing. I think it's a nice way to use this technique in other contexts as well, the glow and grow moments. It's based on their experiences, so it generates intrinsic motivation. Definitely. Here, I guess they were working with comparisons like metaphors, symbols, yes. So we have like lots of different things that could be done here. And I think the great things that you can have access to this like in a file that used to be a great difficulty for teachers working with assessment for learning. How do we collect this evidence from every class? So it's easier for us to show that this development taking place, this progress going on. Well, with online lessons, there's some things we can do. So this is one thing we can do. We could like keep track of what they're doing in their desks throughout the whole course, throughout the week, throughout the project. And then it depends on what you want to do. But it's a great way to gather evidence, because I guess we're still pretty much attached to assessment of learning because it's a clear evidence. You know, it's a clear, it's concrete evidence for the family, for the school. But we can have room for concrete evidence in assessment for learning as well, right? Okay. I'm trying to read here all the comments. I'm gonna come back and read them if I still have time. Glow and grow much better than correct and wrong. Yes, I'll try to come back here in a second. Just because we have like 10 minutes left, there's still one more concept that I'd like us to go through. We talked about assessment of learning and assessment for learning. But something else that I think it's interesting for us to talk about is assessment as learning. So understand these two as like completely completely codependent, completely intertwined. So there isn't a possibility of, learning and developing if you don't get to assess what you're doing. So that's the idea here behind assessment as learning. I don't think this is like a new paradigm, just like the other two that I was contrasting, but it's a belief that we can bring to our practice. And the idea is that it also should take place throughout the whole process, so throughout the whole course or the duration of the learning process. And assessment as learning encourages students to become aware of how they learn. So to understand this two as completely connected is to understand how you learn and why you learn. So there's a lot of metacognition going on here. And I think this is essential for us to keep on learning, right? Because it's possible to get clear feedback from teachers and then keep on developing. That's the idea of assessment for learning. But then in a different course, in a different situation, how do you use those skills, right? So somebody mentioned here self-assessment. Assessment as learning has a lot to do with peer assessment and self-assessment, being able to assess how you learn. And then in Lorna Earle's book, that I have the name in the references, so I really advise you to check. It's a nice book that talks about questions that you can use to encourage students from time to time to answer these questions. And that has to do with this metacognition idea. So here are some questions, for example, that we could encourage students to answer from time to time. So first, what is the purpose of learning these concepts and skills? And here is an individual answer. So every student will have a unique response to that. So what is the purpose for me to learn these concepts and skills that are taking place here in this course? Does that make sense to me? It's important for them to stop and think about that. What do I know about this topic? Maybe it's a topic they already know a lot. So it's important for them to realize that what strategies do I know that will help me learn this? So regardless of what they know, I'm sure there's still a lot to learn. And which strategies they will use for that? Do they know? What are the criteria for improving my work? So we talk a lot about developing and having the room for improvement. Yes, how? What are the criteria that they're going to use to measure that? Have I accomplished the goals I set for myself? I think this is a nice question because we often set, the goals for students at the beginning of the course. Sometimes the goals are set by the teacher, sometimes by the material you're working with, sometimes by the institution. But what about the personal goals that students have, for that course, for that week, for that month? So assessment as learning is encouraging students to reflect about how they learn and what they need to learn more effectively. And it's really a process that each person will have a different process. So we should encourage students from time to time to do that. And do we often do that in our classes? So something for you to stop and think a little bit. How often do you encourage students to reflect about how they learn and what they're learning? This is quite challenging because sometimes they might come to conclusions that class or that lesson or that course is not being so helpful for their goals. So it's maybe it's the answer that no teacher wants to get, but it's also important to encourage students to reflect on that, right? And so as a bit of homework here, because we won't have time for us to discuss here together, but when you like reflecting your weekend there, think a little bit about assessment. I wanted to think about when you use these situations. So think about your practice, your lessons, what you do now, and try to identify in what you do, the moments that there is room for assessment of learning, the moments that you have assessment for learning, if you do, and the moments that you have assessment as learning. Again, if you do. So think about what you already do and try to organize the tools, the kinds of assessments that you have into these three areas. And maybe this will help you plan different kinds of assessment, for future classes. And something that is important for us to consider is that if you wish to change the way people teach and learn, you got to start by changing the way you assess. So if you feel that teaching and learning could be more effective than it is now, let's think about the way we are assessing the students. And this will give us lots of answers, right? And so here are the references I used for this presentation, and I truly encourage you to take a look at them. And I guess, as we said in the beginning, there's not a clear consensus on the role of assessment, because I also think we studied a little about assessment, if you look at grad courses and all kinds of training courses. So let's change that. Let's read more about it. I used a lot of Vilas Boas and Nobre. I used a lot of references in my presentation, and that is my hashtag public. Kidding, it's not public, I'm not being paid to say that, but that's a great book. I use this a lot, getting into ELT assessment. Lots of practical activities, lots of practical tasks for you to reflect on what you do in terms of assessment. So that's a great start for you. And also, to continue this conversation of feedback, as you know, I am an academic consultant at Troika. At Troika, we have lots of courses. And next month, on July 17th, we're going to have this amazing online course called Como Criar Instrumentos Avaliativos Usando Ferramentas Digitais. It's an online course in Portuguese to help you with task design. So you're going to go back to the concepts that I really explained quite quickly, but the idea of validity, reliability, washback, all this is going to be there in this course. I really recommend this course with Gaby Lemos, a wonderful teacher. So you're going to like that. Take a look at troicabr.com, or you can scan the code here to take a look at this course to get more information about it. Of course, I recommend because it's a great course at Troika. I might be a student in this course. And also at Troika, you have like Troika membership. So you have like different types of memberships, and you can access the whole content that Troika has. And one benefit that all kinds of membership has is the access to all the courses, all the online courses that we have recorded. So you have access to all the recordings. And last April, we had a wonderful course on assessment. So if you are a member, you can get to watch these past courses. Well, I guess that's all the time I have. Thank you so much for your participation here in the chat box. It was so nice to try to read all your comments. I don't think I got to read all of them. I'm sorry. It's just, I can't do all this, millennial old person. But thank you so much for all your participation here. If you want to continue this conversation on assessment, here's my email, or you can DM me on Instagram. And I hope to see you talking more about assessment, and we can continue this conversation. And again, back into the first question, I guess assessment is essential to the teaching learning process if we look at it this way and not only as testing. Thank you so much. Hope to see you again. Nice to have lots of food for thought. Hi, bye, Mexico. I'd love to be there. Thank you, everybody. Hey, drop me a line if you want to continue this conversation. There's somebody from Bolivia also here. Yay. I just have to travel vicariously, just reading chat box, because, Brazil, we can travel home. Bye, people. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop recording. It's the end of our webinar. Thank you so much for being here.